joining me to watch her in action is Theresa Villiers, Conservative MP, former Northern Ireland Secretary. I've got SNP's Drew Hendry with me and Labour's Stephen Kinnock. So thanks for joining me. And we were just looking, weren't we, at some pictures of the chamber, and it looked on your benches, Theresa, that it was pretty empty. Is everyone just not bothering anymore?
Well, it is quite striking. I mean, I was here in this studio for Theresa May's first ever PMQs, and there is certainly a bit of a difference when it comes not just to atmosphere, but attendance as well in the chamber.
Well, why do you think that is? Is it just as power drains away, attention moves to someone else or somewhere else?
I think, I can't speak for all my colleagues, but I think that must be a big explanation. When one is contemplating regime change within days, that does affect perhaps people's attendance at PMQs.
Yeah.
Well, and actually, this has been going on for quite a while. We've seen the chamber on the Tory benches very, very thin, and they used to make a noise when the Prime Minister came in, when Theresa May came into the chamber. It's virtually silent now, and that's been going on for several months, I think, since the failures of her deal that she brought forward to Parliament.
And you, on the SNP benches, will be making, no doubt, a lot of noise when there's a new Prime Minister, if that's Boris Johnson, won't you? Because I've noticed that the SNP attack him every PMQs. Is that fair?
Well, there's no good choice out of Jeremy Hunt or Boris Johnson for Scotland. Both of them will be a dreadful result for the people there. So obviously Boris Johnson is the one that's most likely to achieve his coronation in terms of the Tory party system. What should be happening is that what happens in the Welsh Parliament, what happens in the Scottish Parliament. Parliament should get a vote on who becomes the leader in Parliament. You know, if it's the First Minister, that has to go to the members of Parliament. Pete Wishart is trying to put a bill through Parliament to make that the case. But the fact is that Boris Johnson, having been appointed by some Tory MPs and a number of mainly elderly Tory
tens of
voters,
thousands of Tory members.
Well, still not anything like the 66 million people that are across the nations of the UK. You know, so this process is going to happen, and quite rightly we'll call it out. Quite rightly we'll call out the past failures of Boris Johnson, the comments he makes, the racist comments he's made, the quite outrageous things he said about how he feels that Scotland should be treated. And yes, we'll make a lot of noise about that.
And just in terms of Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt, in terms of Brexit, they are now pushing quite hard for a no-deal Brexit, if necessary. Both of them this week, in quite a significant moment, I thought, said that the backstop has to completely go, time limits won't do. Stephen, how concerned are you about a no-deal Brexit? I know that you're quite supportive of trying to get a withdrawal agreement vote through the Commons, aren't you?
Yes, I'm very concerned now about a no-deal Brexit. I think it's looking like the most likely outcome. We've handed the future of the country to 160,000 Conservative Party members, most of whom embrace no deal, and Boris Johnson's going to win. He embraces no deal, and I think it is the legal default position. So I'm extremely concerned about that, and I hope that we will have an opportunity to vote on the withdrawal agreement bill, which of course we never had a chance to do. One thing I think we also need to be realistic about is that the withdrawal agreement as negotiated between Theresa May and Boris Johnson is not going to change in any substantial way. The deal is the deal.
Yeah.
Stephen Barclay was in Brussels the other day, and he was told very clearly by Barnier that the deal is the deal. There may be some very slight tweaks in there, possibly a longer extension transition period, which could potentially resolve the issue of the backstop, but I think that would be about it in terms of what Brussels is prepared to offer.
Actually, given that you've just brought him up, I think we actually have a clip of Stephen Barclay in Brussels. Have we got a clip of him? I think he was speaking earlier today. Can we play that out?
Each session I've said, and sometimes it's upset some of my colleagues, that a no deal would be disruptive. I've always been clear on that, but the no Brexit I think is the worst of those two outcomes. It is why I have always supported a deal. I have consistently voted for a deal. But if we are left with a binary choice between no deal or no Brexit, as I said to the committee last time, then I think it is important we respect the democratic result.
Yeah, so Stephen Barclay, actually in a select committee, not in Brussels, who was there earlier in the week, he's clear that no deal's better than no Brexit. Theresa, you would agree with that, wouldn't you? Would you be prepared to see Parliament prorogued to make that happen, a no deal if necessary?
Well, I mean, this prorogation issue, I can't believe that it would ever happen beyond the normal kind of couple of days prorogation for a Queen's speech. But both the Conservative leadership candidates are clear that they would prefer a deal, but that the current deal is not acceptable. It failed 3 times in Parliament, and the backstop has to go completely. So I welcome that clarity from them. But neither of them is pushing for no deal. Both of them want sensible and reasonable terms from the European Union, so we can have a deal which gets
One
Parliament.
thing I'm interested in terms of the Conservative Party is, and as a Brexiteer, I'd be really interested in your view, could you accept a longer transition period in order to then move straight to a free trade agreement, and therefore you could drop the backstop because you're either in transition and it's not relevant, or you're on to the future trade deal in which the backstop's resolved, or would that not work for you?
I've always been pragmatic on transition periods. I can see there are some advantages. So if it was part of a wider acceptable deal with acceptable terms, yes, I could live with a transition period, though obviously some of my colleagues would be reluctant.
Okay. Well, look, let's we're gonna wrap up, and we're gonna go to the break in a moment. But you can see the Commons in your screen there. I can't see that many Conservatives. I'm wondering if next week a lot of Conservative MPs will come to watch Theresa May's final Prime Minister's question. She's also given a speech later today, her farewell speech too, so busy day for her. But stay tuned, and we'll be back with all the action in a moment. Welcome back. You can see the chamber filling up. I'm joined by Theresa Villiers of the Conservatives, Drew Hendry of the SNP, and Labour's Stephen Kinnock. Let's just do a quick fire while we're waiting for the PM. Stephen, what do you think is going to come up?
I think the issue of no deal and a possible crash out will come up. I think the comments by Mark Carney about the country being closer to a recession than it has been at any time since 2007. And I think the disgraceful comments of Donald Trump, racist comments of Donald Trump, could well come up.
Drew?
Yeah, I'd agree. The colossal damage of no deal should come up today. The comments made by Trump, I think, are likely to be brought up in the chamber. I think any attempt to to process a democratic outrage by proroguing or mucking about with the parliamentary process is probably also something that may come up today.
Okay, no deal, proroguing, Trump. Theresa, anything else?
I agree that the Trump comments will come up. I think my colleagues will be wanting to talk about the very, very positive employment figures this week.
Yeah, good. There were good employment figures. I think, is that the Prime Minister on her feet? I can't quite see. No, it's not her. She's not quite there. And I wonder what Jeremy Corbyn will go on, because do you think he'll go on no deal, Stephen? Do you think he doesn't like to go on Brexit because it's all been a bit uncomfortable on your benches too, hasn't it?
But I think it is the elephant in the room, so I think that he should. I think it's right to confront the issue and to put down that challenge to Theresa May to say, oh, by the way, you know, when you wrote to Donald Tusk asking for an extension, you said that we would use it to accept the withdrawal agreement, not to alter
well,
it.
he's about to be up, so let's have a listen, see what he says. Welcome back to our PMQs panel. I've got Theresa Villiers from the Conservatives, Drew Hendry from the SNP, and Labour's Stephen Kinnock. And we've all been sitting here watching those exchanges between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn, really having an argument about which party appears to be more racist. I can't think of anything more depressing to watch. But let's have a listen to the exchange, and then I'll bring in my panel and let's see what they think.
60 distinguished members of the Labour Party have written in the newspapers, the Labour Party welcomes everyone except, it seems, Jews. This is your legacy, Mr. Corbyn. You still haven't opened your eyes. You still haven't told the whole truth. You still haven't accepted your responsibility. You have failed the test of leadership. Apologise now.
And we have Mr. Corbyn there as well, because he obviously then we don't have him there, but then he attacked Theresa May. He said that there was a recent poll showing that 60% of Conservative Party members held Islamophobic views, and said that she too had a problem in her own party, and a problem that the Conservatives themselves were not really tackling. But it's certainly true that Jeremy Corbyn, again under the spotlight over issues of anti-Semitism. So, Stephen, let's come to you. One of your colleagues, Wed Streeton, who's been very vocal about this, tweeted out after these exchanges that Jeremy Corbyn had lost the moral high ground through his failure to act on anti-Semitism. He described it as throwing mud from the gutter. What do you think?
Well, I agree that Jeremy should apologise for the failure of the party to deal with the anti-Semitism crisis effectively. We've been calling for a fully independent process free of political interference, and also the decision to attack those very brave whistleblowers who went onto the television, some of them who'd been contemplating suicide and having nervous breakdowns, to attack them, to shoot the messenger rather than engage with the substance. I thought that was disgraceful on the part of the party. I think this is a shameful chapter in our history. I think it's an existential issue for the Labour Party, and the leader of the opposition, the leader of my party, needs to step up and put those measures in place.
But there's lots of hand-wringing from lots of your colleagues about it. There's tons of it. I see it all the time everywhere. Everyone's saying this is awful, this is terrible. But when it comes down to it, Jeremy Corbyn stands there and doesn't really accept the criticism. As you said, the strategy was then to attack the whistleblowers rather than reflect on the evidence. What do you actually do about it, rather than we're just going round in a circle where nothing changes?
Well, we have to keep the pressure up. We have to hold the leader of our party to account. But what I would say is that no one man or woman or faction or tradition in our party is bigger than the party. We're talking here about the party of Clement Attlee, of Aneurin Bevan, of Harold Wilson, of Gordon Brown. We stand as Labour MPs on the shoulders of giants, and we have to honour the legacy of our party. We've got to save the Labour Party. We've got to bring it back to what is real Labour, and that means dealing with this faction who hold these bizarre conspiracy theories about the role of Jews in the capitalist system. We need to root that out. It has no place in the Labour Party. This isn't just about dealing with processes and standards. It's also about dealing with a worldview and a culture in the party, which I'm afraid has got far bigger than it should be since 2015. Those views do not reflect the views of the mainstream Labour Party, mainstream membership and members of Parliament, and we need to get a Labour Party that does reflect those views. We've got to get that back. Jeremy Corbyn is the leader of the party. He is the only man that can solve this issue. He has got to get hold of it. He's got to get hold of the National Executive Committee and all of those who support him, and make it clear that this is not acceptable.
And coming to you, Theresa, about the Conservative Party, because you'll remember in the early stages of the leadership contest, Sajid Javid, the Home Secretary, challenged Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt and other would-be Prime Ministers to have an independent review into Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. He, as a Muslim serving in Cabinet, clearly thinks there is a case to answer, or at least investigate. Do you agree? Do you think you need to get onto the front foot with this to avoid perhaps it ballooning in the way it has in Labour?
Well, I would have no objection to an independent investigation into this issue, but I don't believe we take very seriously any allegations of this sort. And if members are guilty of what they are accused of being, i.e. being Islamophobic or racist, in my understanding is that they are expelled. But any issue that there may be in the Conservative Party has nothing. I mean, that Panorama programme was truly shocking. And I've never seen a Prime Minister's questions, which, like this one, turned into questions to the Leader of the Opposition, because Jeremy Corbyn, I'm afraid, has no convincing answers on this. His history has made a substantial number of people, a substantial number of anti-Semites, think that Labour is their safe space.
But does it worry you when you see a poll suggesting that 60% of your party members hold Islamophobic views? I mean, you must look at that and think, oh, not in my name.
Absolutely not in my name, but frankly, I don't believe that poll. That doesn't reflect my knowledge and understanding of Conservative Party members. We are a party that welcomes people from all parts of the community, from all ethnic backgrounds. We do not have this horrific problem with racism that has infected the Labour Party and which they are consistently and disgracefully failing to deal with.
And Drew, what did you make of all of that and that exchange between the leaders of the two biggest parties in this country?
Well, I think that they both have significant problems. It doesn't do anybody any favours to try and ignore the fact that there are problems in the Tory party. There are clearly, those are going to get greater if somebody like Boris Johnson takes the reins, who's got track record of the kind of comments that won't be helpful in aiding this kind of situation. The problem in the Labour Party and the Tory party just demonstrates how broken Westminster is at the moment. The fact that we couldn't have a question at Prime Minister's questions about climate change, the biggest single issue facing us just now, because it was overridden by fighting about the racism in the Tory party and in the Labour Party, is an absolute disgrace. We should have been talking about the fact that the government's 2050 target is an empty shell at the moment. We should have been discussing that just now. Instead, we're discussing anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. It's an absolute disgrace in the British political system.
Do you think that, actually, that's an interesting point. Do you think that the Prime Minister should be able to just change onto a party political attack line in the way she did, rather than actually taking the questions from the Leader of Opposition? Because in fairness to Jeremy Corbyn, that's his moment for half an hour a week to actually press the Prime Minister on a policy issue. And she turned it into something very different there.
It's rarely I'll agree with Jeremy Corbyn, but I think that was a good thing to open on today, to go on the fact that there is this, this promise that's been made, and there's nothing backing it up in terms of how they're going to deliver the 2050 target. And the fact that it was then flipped over onto, which are genuine issues, these are things that should be discussed. The anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party needs to be urgently dealt with. It's an absolute disgrace that it's got to this place. And the problems in the Tory party are equally as urgent, but it shouldn't have been at that point. We should have been talking about the problems around dealing with climate change and the fact that there are real issues there. And it's not really right that that was flipped over in that way.
And just in terms of what we thought might be discussed and Brexit and a no-deal Brexit, there's lots of talk now about whether Mr Johnson can actually deliver, if he becomes Prime Minister, as we expect, whether he can deliver a no-deal Brexit on October the 31st. Amber Rudd suggested that once he is into number 10, his plans are going to collide with reality, the reality of what the Commission's going to offer in Brussels, but also what Parliament are going to do. Do you agree with that, Theresa? Do you think that actually whether the Conservative Party and the new Brexiteer cabinet wants it or not, Mr Johnson will be blocked?
The road ahead won't be easy. I'm in no doubt about that, but I believe that there is a majority in the House of Commons that is willing to respect the result of the referendum. And I feel strongly that we need to get on with this, that we cannot continue extensions and political deadlock. You know, there is I think, a strong wish from people, not only who voted Leave, but many who voted Remain, that we cannot carry on as we are. So the choice that the House of Commons probably will face may be, potentially, if there is no acceptable deal, they may have to look at whether they are prepared to leave without a deal or whether they're prepared to revoke. I don't think a majority of MPs would revoke.
Because it's interesting, because the Conservative Party and Boris Johnson and others have said that the Conservatives will face an existential crisis if they fail to deliver Brexit on October the 31st. But also, 48% of the country did vote Remain. Even 52% that voted to leave 3 years ago perhaps didn't think that we might be leaving in a no-deal scenario.
But 80% of people voted for parties in the general election who promised to respect the result of the referendum.
And leave,
we will be punished as a party if we do not deliver on that promise.
And leave with a deal rather than in a no-deal scenario. That does change the game, doesn't it? A no deal.
Everyone would, most people would prefer to leave with a deal, but if there is no acceptable deal on the table from the European Union, we still have to respect the result of the referendum.
And I'm interested in the SNP as well, because obviously you are making hay, attacking Boris Johnson, linking him to Nigel Farage, linking him to Donald Trump. Politically, Boris Johnson in number 10 is a massive problem for the Scottish Tories. The Scottish Tories who edged May May into number 10, right?
Well, I'd agree with that, but Boris Johnson in number 10, just like Jeremy Hunt in number 10, is a massive problem for Scotland as a whole. There is no good outcome, and if their debate was really about who could deliver the hardest Brexit, and this is part of the madness of Westminster at the moment. Even the government's own economic figures show that there is no good Brexit. Every single version of Brexit causes deep harm, right up to the calamitous no-deal scenario, where it has a massive impact across the UK, and in Scotland could cost up to 100,000 jobs and cost families £2,300 each per year. Now that's going to be that's an absolute dreadful result. It must be avoided, but either one of them seems determined to take us over the cliff.
Yeah, I mean, both of you are clearly on completely opposing sides. Stephen, you're probably somewhere in the middle where you accept it's right to leave, but you want a deal. I guess if you're Boris Johnson looking at the Labour benches at the moment, though, you're thinking Jeremy Corbyn can't win an election anyway, aren't you?
Well, I mean, I've always believed that 52-48 was a mandate to move house but stay in the same neighbourhood. That means leaving the European Union, leaving the political institutions, but keeping a really close economic relationship. And I think there's an opportunity to do that through the withdrawal agreement bill, which, by the way, is full of concessions to Labour, bill on workers' rights, environmental standards, and even a commitment to holding a referendum, having a debate about holding a referendum.
Have you had any chats with anyone in the Johnson camp about whether Labour MPs could back
No, I
them?
haven't been approached, but I wrote a piece on this in The Observer on Sunday, so I don't know whether they read The Observer in the Johnson camp, but my view is clear.
Might start next week. You think they'll need Labour votes to get it over the line?
Yeah, I think Boris Johnson would rather leave the EU with a deal than without a deal. Brussels has made it clear there is very, very limited margin for manoeuvre on changing the deal. So what he brings back has to look like the withdrawal agreement bill, which unfortunately Parliament never had a chance to debate or vote on, because I'm afraid it was torpedoed by purists, the no-deal purists, and those campaigning for a second referendum.
Well, I'm very sorry to say we've run out of time, which is a shame because I was really enjoying that. But thank you, Teresa. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Stephen, for joining us.